Okay, guys, and welcome back to another podcast. This week's going to be a little bit different. I have got a full-on guest for this podcast. So it's been a while since I've done an actual guest interview on the podcast itself. It's either been solo podcasts with me or joint podcasts where we're both talking about a specific topic. We did plan to have Joe sort of discussing a little bit on purely off-season pushing up in body weight. But last week Joe was sick, so we weren't able to do that. So I thought I'd actually take the opportunity to get Joe on for purely a guest interview, which is going to be exciting for me because it allows me to take a bit more of a backseat and obviously to sort of fire away questions at Joe that primarily I want to hear his opinions on, but also therefore you guys will be very interested too. So for anyone that doesn't know Joe himself is a very well experienced coach within the bodybuilding industry. Definitely stamped his mark as one of the go-to guys as well in terms of knowledge in the UK. He runs his own podcast, the Optimal Physique Development Podcast with Austin Stout. And then again, I would highly recommend you guys going and listening to that if you haven't already. So to crack straight off into things, Joe, I don't want to waste any time with regards to anything else. I want to just get first into the question. So where from the off-season perspective, a lot of people seem to get confused with start points. So where would you, for a client, coming to you for an off-season, what would be the ideal spot to look to start an off-season? So how are we looking for a position to grow? Like, what markers are we looking at from a health perspective? What are we looking at from a body composition perspective? And what general considerations are we taking before we even start the off-season phase? What's the generic start point that you're looking at as a coach?
Okay, cool. So as you know, firstly, thank you very much for having me on. Hello, everybody that's listening. You probably have never heard of me because I don't think we share much of the same audience.
True. Yeah.
Most of you guys probably know my wife, actually, Jasmine. Probably listen to her podcast more than mine. But right, yeah. So yeah, AJ, thank you so much for having me on. I'm honoured to be on. So breaking down the off-season thing, you mentioned quite a few things there that I think are worth digging into. So health, firstly, is generally top of my list. We'll be looking at comprehensive pieces of blood work and various other biomarkers, like simple ones you can do yourself. It could be heart rate variability, blood glucose, resting heart rate, stuff like that. I want to know that you're not overly sympathetically driven. So this could be if you pick up a client straight out of a contest prep, they're probably very systemically stressed, inflamed, and very sympathetic nervous system dominant. So I need to get them out of that first. If you're an enhanced athlete, or in fact, let's stick to the natural thing now, being that that's your audience. Sure. You're likely hypergonadal if you're coming out the end of a contest prep. We want to get your HPG axes, your HPTA axes, everything from your testosterone, your thyroidal function. We want to get that back online firstly. That's the primary concern. So that could mean for some people, like women, getting their calories very high, very fast, and on body fat on purpose, which is something that people don't want to do. And I suppose is something that we should talk a little bit about why in some cases you want to push harder. So that there are some cases that you will have to put on body fat fast. I mean, it's happened to me recently with a new client where they had amenorrhea, extended amenorrhea for a long time, which isn't in and of itself a health concern, but she had some androgen-estrogen ratio imbalances on blood work when we dig further, and it was simply a case of I said, look, eat this for 2 weeks, and I'm going to bet you a month's coaching fee that you get your period, and she did, luckily, even though she hadn't had it for 7 odd months since her last show, so which isn't a long time in the grand scheme. People go a lot longer. And it's not necessarily something to worry about unless it correlates with some odd blood work. So there's an example. And then if you are enhanced, you want to get your lipids back where they should be, kidney function, liver function, everything back online. So that could be something as simple as introducing a liposomal glutathione, addressing DAO and various other histamine issues that could come about from your trenbolone usage or whatever, which is a very common pre-contest drug. Sure. Making sure that if you're coming out at the end of a contest that you are insulin sensitive and your nutrient partition is where it should be. In some cases, people are too insulin sensitive and they're going hypo when they're going for a walk and things like that when, truly peeled. Again, a case for putting some calories in fast. It does work the other way as well. You don't want to be completely insulin resistant with a super high blood glucose reading, but you don't want to be super low all the time either. I'm not going to be.
Are all these sort of methods of biofeedback something that you would do straight away with every single client that you'd work with in going into an off-season phase? Would you deem these as almost essential pre-off-season markers for every athlete, or do you think there's sort of levels to including biofeedback as an athlete?
Definitely not everyone. And interestingly, someone that you probably know, Kerry Sexton, asked me this today about reading blood glucose.
Sure.
Something that she wants to learn more herself. Like, oh, do I need to measure this? Like, you don't need to, but what gets measured gets managed, essentially. And if you are a pro and you want to do whatever it takes to win, which is most of my clients, they are I don't work with many Gen Pop. It's mostly people that are doing everything in their capacity to win or to perform. We will dig further, but not everybody. You know, if you're just a Gen Pop person that's not out the back end of a contest and you just want to gain some muscle and you're fairly lean and stuff, you don't need to take your blood glucose postprandial after every meal or something, and, you know, be doing heart rate variability when you wake up every day, because on the other end it can go too far. And people do it with HRV. They measure their HRV. Oh my God, it's a little bit sympathetic today. I can't train for 5 days and I need to take a 10-hour-long Epsom salt bath, you know. So, you know, you could go in and have the best session of your life that night, you know. It does go too far.
Yeah, I think that's what I've seen. I mean, I'm interested to hear your opinions on this as well. I think one of the common preconceptions with the biofeedback side of things in the fitness industry at the moment is that if you don't have the ability to be in touch with all of these things yourself, then that's a poor thing to have as an athlete. Like, you should be able to understand this within your own sort of understanding of recovery and how you're partitioning nutrients and where your body composition is at. But how often is, for you, someone as a coach who uses biofeedback, how often have you got someone who, amongst the preconception in the fitness industry, would have a standard good level of, like, fasted blood glucose, for example, so they had good level of body composition, tended to sort of be responding to nutrients well, but for some reason the fasted reading wasn't where it would be, or wasn't where you'd expect it to be? How often have you sort of come into that, or are most of these biofeedback tools giving you what you'd already expect from them?
It does happen where you'll get some biomarkers that aren't where you think they're going to be, but when you dig further, you tend to figure out why. Like, a big example is if someone's lean, in great shape and whatever, and they've got a high fasted blood glucose, or they're not partitioning nutrients properly. I mean, usually if I dig into their sleep, that's the problem. Or they're overly sympathetically stressed and things like that. You know, they're in great shape, but they're not functioning properly on a central nervous system level.
Sure. Yeah, that was the response that I'd expect to hear, because I've toyed with it myself in coaching, and it seems to give me what I'd expect pretty much 9 out of 10 times, with a few underlying things. Like, have you ever had, out of weird interest as well, have you ever had people have poor quality strips, or a weird batch of strips? That give just fucking abnormal readings, like diabetic readings, consistently?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, though. They are, I mean, every marker, like even blood work, like, I feel like I can tell an assay error when I see it. Yeah. Like, sometimes I'll get someone's, like, their testosterone will be 700 and their estrogen's 200. I'm like, there's no way you are aromatizing testosterone at that level. Like, you probably don't even have that many aromatase enzymes in your whole body. Like, that is an error. And they're going, oh my God, am I going to get man boobs? And so it's like, it's just not real. Like, forget about it. Like, there's no way that's, unless you're injecting pure estrogen, that's not happening. Like, yeah, and you get it, but they're usually, like, off the scale.
Yeah. Sure. Understood. So, that's cool. That's covered a lot of things with regards to start point with biofeedback. Before we move on to sort of, like, where you'd want to be from a few other perspectives, staying on the process of biofeedback now, with blood glucose and just general recovery capacity within the HRV readings, what's some of the first things that you would do in terms of digging deeper? You mentioned sleep, but what else would be, like, sort of dug into if an athlete was giving poor feedback on some of these sort of ground level biofeedback variables?
Stress being an all-encapsulating thing of many, like it's multifactorial stress, isn't it?
Yeah.
How stressed are people getting at simple situations? What's their level of perceived stress in relation to their systemic stress? You know, do they even realize that they're stressed? Like, are they eating whilst driving, you know, or something like that? Are they walking around the house doing something, eating out of a Tupperware? Or are they sitting down and taking their time and chewing their meals, you know? Oh, you know, I've been busy today, so I've just been throwing down meals. They don't even realize that they're stressed.
Yeah.
And, you know, because perceived stress and actual systemic physical stress are very different things. And you have to sometimes really quiz your clients, because, you know, when your clients check in, yeah, man, I feel great, everything's great. But you can see on the feedback that it's not. And they don't even realize sometimes, you know, you say, how long is it taking you to eat your meals? Oh, about, you know, 5 minutes. Well, you're on 6,000 calories a day.
Yeah.
You know, your meal should be taking you at least half an hour to eat if you're eating them properly.
Yeah.
You know, it's little stuff. Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, I was just down in a shake on my way to work and stuff. And these all things, you know, downstream have cascading effects that end up raising blood glucose and trashing nutrient partitioning, essentially.
Yeah, understood. So it's interesting, because I think nowadays in a lot of coaching doesn't dig this deep at all. I'm sure you're aware of this, Joe, with some of the clients that you've got that come from other coaches or other coaching processes. And I don't think even as coaches, a lot of people take this into perspective as much as they need to. I must admit myself, it's only in recent years of coaching that I've taken this into perspective. When I first started coaching, I wouldn't think beyond this as much depth as we are doing now as coaches, and it does unravel a lot of things that you were like, okay, like this is why this is happening. So yeah, I think it's something that even like as just any athlete needs to consider. Anyone looking to maximize even just pure muscle gain, or obviously maximizing fat loss as well, they just need to consider all of these variables. So yeah, that's fantastic regarding biofeedback. In terms of body composition, so most people going into an off-season phase, if they're a competitor, will have ended a prep, of course. But for someone that's maybe not ended a prep, what general guidelines would you look at in terms of just the way that someone comes to you from a body composition perspective? What would you look for in terms of just simply the way someone looks in their physique update? What would you be looking for there before pushing up calories?
So what we need to look at here is the most pertinent topic is, what does their body composition have to be for them to function optimally day to day and increase performance? Because we're not thinking about fat loss anymore. Let's forget about that. And that's what most people need to realize is you need to swap your mind to the goal of gaining muscle now. Unless you want to get on stage in a couple of years, next year, whatever, looking exactly the same and getting waxed, you know, you need to realize that you need to dedicate this time. And for some people, that means putting on, you know, quite a bit of body fat, because some people, there's a lot of biological inter-individuality with performance, especially within women. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. Some women have to add more fat than they're comfortable with, unfortunately, to be at optimal hormone levels, which therefore downstream optimal levels of performance and whatnot, reduce stress. And it's little things like the psychological relief of not craving food. You know, that's something so simple, but that is a stressor. I don't want my clients in their off season to be thinking about when their next meal is. I want them to be chilling out. Yeah. And they eat when they're meant to eat, and then they're PRing every session or something, you know. If that means getting a little bit fat, I don't care, because losing fat is a lot easier than gaining muscle, especially amongst your audience. And I see it in the natural scene a lot, is that people are scared to add body fat. But I'll tell you something, every pro or true successful bodybuilder that I know, you know, and you can't say, oh yeah, but they're enhanced or whatever. The same rules still apply. By no means playing down the drugs here, they are powerful and they work, you know, because that's something else that gets on my nerves. But they've all gone through a period that you haven't seen, where they've had to really push hard. Yeah, and people don't give it the what's the word I'm looking for? The credit it deserves, I think, and you just have to accept that your goal has now switched. So sorry for rambling there, but body composition wise, I'm not necessarily, I'm not talking about getting people fat and sloppy. Yeah, but you hear these rules like you should always be able to see your abs. Well, what if you genetically hold all of your body fat in your abdomen or fluid, especially when, I don't want to ramble about drugs, but when drugs come into play, if you're using higher insulins, you're going to hold fluid. And if you hold most of it in your gut, trust me, you're not going to see your abs. That doesn't mean you're not still lean, but you might be in the best possible place for performance. Am I back?
I think I've got you back.
What's going on here? This doesn't normally happen.
You were just on your point on performance.
Right, yeah. So for some people, they're going to have to push up harder than they'd probably like.
Okay. So you just touched on why some people need to push up further. And I think we're very much in agreement that people need to push to the point at which they are achieving their best performance. Okay, so we're seeing logbook PBs. Most importantly, I think, we're seeing that they're making substantial progress from their previous off-season. So if they're looking at previous off-season PBs, they are beating them because that obviously is going to hopefully guarantee that they're building new levels of muscle mass. When you're in an off-season phase, what sort of signs, when you are pushing up and performance is great, when is that too much? When do we get to the point at which we need to start pulling back? What are your general feedback tools from clients within check-in processes or whatever feedback they're giving you? What do we generally look for in terms of pulling back, and how would that sort of tend to occur?
Right, so this is kind of multifaceted, and it ultimately comes down to a few different points for me. Firstly, on a physiological level, we're looking where their blood glucose starts sitting a bit higher than it was, so therefore some level of insulin resistance is coming in. Their nutrient partition is therefore heading down, therefore more nutrients going to the muscle cell, more nutrients going to the fat cell, less to the muscle cell, and then you can see it reflected in their pictures from, they're just getting fatter and they're not adding any more muscle tissue.
Is that reading individual, Joe, or is that a reading that you're generally looking at? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I look at blood glucose on like averages of what people are sitting at. If it's a little bit different. I'm looking at where they're sort of sitting, and as long as we're kind of in a normal range below 90 postprandial fasted and they're looking good and performing well, it's just I'm looking at trends more so than single numbers, because I think what we often forget in the physique industry is that as blood glucose is a snapshot in time. It's you in that very moment taking a reading, and it can be affected by so many different things. So look, I'm looking at a trend on charts, and if it's starting to head up and the body composition following, and the client's feeling sluggish and stuff, and they're not getting good pumps in the gym either because their partition is off, then maybe it's time to pull back and reset. Length of time this can happen for is like highly individual. Like in my enhanced athletes, like to be honest, I can hold this off for a very long time, because if you've got a combination of things like metformin, GDAs, insulin, stuff like that, it's not happening really, because I've got control over their blood glucose.
Yeah. Sure. So from
Hopefully
a body composition point of view, obviously you said taking people up to where they perform their best, but do not so much body composition, but more so body weight. With assisted athletes, obviously we're going to get, potentially with the amount of muscle that we can accrue as assisted athletes, you can accrue more muscle, more body weight in your off season without having to look to get closer to your stage weight. So the proximity to stage weight is different from a natural perspective. But in terms of like where you take someone if they plan to compete the next season, so if you had a whole year off and then you can plan to compete the next season, where have you seen people like go up to in terms of peak body weights above their previous stage weight?
Oh man, it's so variable, and it's also going to depend on if they have a weight class to fit back into.
Sure.
Like if I give you the example of my client Tom, don't know if you've seen Tom, he's an IFBB classic, Tom Evans in Vienna. I think he's been off season for about 12 weeks, He's 70 pounds up.
Wow.
Yeah, but he's still lean. He's still got fully visible abs and whatnot. But he's also like 6'5" and he weighs 300 pounds. So
Sure.
it's a bit of a different animal. But if I got a small girl, we could be in the range of 20 pounds. Again, it's so individual. Because even some of my girls perform well staying quite lean, and they can get through a lot of food, train really high intensity, and it's great. Some can't.
Yeah.
So it's really put a number on that, to be honest.
Absolutely. Yeah, I understood. In terms of a lot of people struggle in the off season with motivation levels because a lot of people are fueled by competing, and they want that next stage event to come around faster than potentially is. How do you and your clients sort of get together a perspective on the off season, and do you set goals? Do you have timescales that are really far in advance? How do you tend to plan and schedule out off seasons for competitors, especially?
Right, yeah, you're completely right that competitors are neurotic dieters as well, and they always want to just drop and get lean again. Um, so I think you have to make a big point and ingrain to them that if they want to be the best, they have to learn to switch their mind to this goal right now. Because especially as a natural competitor, you accrue muscle tissue so slowly as an advanced resistance trainee. If you look at Lyle McDonald's like reviews on the literature there, you're looking at something like £1 a year.
I prefer not to.
After like 4 years of training.
Yeah.
So so you're gonna have to, but don't tell yourself it's £1 a year. Say I'm gonna gain £10 this year because I'm gonna ensure everything is 1,000%. And when you tell them things like that, they're like, actually, yeah. Because it's so easy to go. I mean, how many people do you know that get on stage every year and look the same?
9 out of 10.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just about switching. Yeah, or gradually worse, which happens all the time. Yeah, 100%. It's just switching goals because people are just goal orientated in this sport. We're so neurotic and obsessed with goal setting and being disciplined and doing the hard stuff or whatever other motivational holistic rubbish you want to say. It's you just got to switch your mind to the goal at hand and realize that is the goal at hand.
From a psychological perspective, are you more of a stern coach? Do you say it how it is to most of your clients, or do you treat your clients individually in terms of how you force them to stay in off-season phases?
Absolutely individual. And the longer you work with someone, I think a good coach learns how to talk to each client individually to get them to perform. Yeah. So I have some clients that I know that I need to talk to very sternly and tell them how it is. And I've got one client who may or may not listen to this, John Gill. He's a muscle tech guy. He's got an awesome physique, but he whines like a bitch, right? I'm hungry, and I have to say, John, shut the fuck up. I'm not interested. I'm not going to hold your hand through this. Just get on with it. You're a grown man. Stop WhatsApping me at 3 a.m, and that's that. But then other clients I've got to be a little bit more soft with, and because they don't respond to that, and you learn that over time. You just got to try little things in there and see how they respond. I think that's what a good coach does, is develop great communication with their clients, because coaching isn't barking orders, it's coaching. It's in the name. You are that person's coach. You're not just telling them what to eat and how to train. You're also their support system. And it's your job to learn how to get the best from your clients through whatever methods.
Absolutely. So moving away a little bit from setting goals, moving more so into nutrition for an off-season phase. So in terms of how we set up the composition of a diet, of course this is going to be very varied, but what would you say is your most frequently used approach for composition of the diet? So how we're setting up macros in an off-season phase. Are we favouring carbohydrates and running moderate fats? Are we favouring extremely high protein? Do you just give a few examples of different approaches that you're using for composition of the diet?
Oh man, and that's hard because again, it's very individual. And I think, if we're realistic about it, we can talk nutrient timing and the the satiety and thermic effects of protein and the benefits of this and that until the cows come home. But ultimately, the things that matter are clients' preferences, keeping GI health on top,
Okay.
getting sufficient protein, and hitting a calorie goal. They're the kind of main things that we need to focus on. And then around that, I kind of build to the client's preference and also, you know, their drug use ultimately, if they're an enhanced athlete. So if they're using a long-acting insulin analog, I won't be nutrient timing carbs just around the workout. You know, that'd be silly. They'd be hypo 80% of the day. If they're using a short analog, then maybe I'll favour more carbs around the workout with the insulin use or something. Natural athletes, I really think it doesn't really matter for the most part. Nail some semblance of calorie and electrolyte goal. I think people really forget about sodium potassium ratios and their benefits to body composition and performance and total levels depending on their output and fluid intake. I mean, that's something that I put a lot of focus into that people don't seem to for whatever reason. And as long as they're covering their micro phytonutrient, fiber and protein needs, I think the rest of the calories really don't matter. Just get them from sources that you enjoy, firstly, because enjoyment comes into GI health a ton. I mean, look at the research on gut microbiota and foods that people enjoy and then therefore how well they digest them. You know, if you're eating, you know, fish and a rice cake or whatever, and you don't like it, then shooting yourself in the foot, there's nothing hardcore about it. You're just being a meathead.
Yeah. Do you think there's any sense in...
So, yeah.
Sorry, Joe.
I mean, it's such variance, man.
Do you think there's any sense in favouring significantly higher carbs and running as low fat as possible in an off-season phase? This seems to be quite a popularised method within a few coaches recently, and I think Micah Israel has done a lot of top chats on the topic. What's your opinions on that? Do you think that that's maybe sort of shooting yourself in the foot sometimes a little bit with sort of GI discomfort for some people on extremely high food, or...
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that approach. If we were going to talk maximum performance, we'd probably say like as much fat as needed, and then the rest with carbohydrate. You know, that's probably somewhere around 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, maybe. But I don't really favour the super low fat thing, especially for non-enhanced athletes. I mean, what are hormones made out of? Cholesterol. So we need to keep that in mind. I don't like that we're never hitting that slow gastric emptying point of a meal if you're just having protein carb meals all the time. I don't like the micronutrients that you're missing out on and things from like, I mean, I'm a big fan of like whole fat yogurt, whole milk, cheese. I like to include in my clients' diets as much as I can. Beef, I'm a big red meat fan for protein sources. I personally think it's the ultimate source of protein out there. I did do a post on that the other day. You know, again, especially in unenhanced athletes, because we can really take advantage of the iron, the zinc, the selenium, the creatine, things that you just don't get from poultry or fish, B12 as well. So I'm not a high fat guy. I'm not a low fat guy either. I'm more like, how much do you need? But if people have super high caloric goals, I've got a couple of clients that are eating over 9,000 calories a day. They can't
go low fat.
Yeah, what are they going to eat?
Yeah.
You know, you can't eat 500 grams of rice with every meal. You know, so I got the mix in. You know, but then when you mix in almond butter with whole fat yogurts and then having some cereal with it, you know, you get that down easy, and you can hit a 2,000 calorie meal, and you're fine. But you know, you'd be eating a whole box of cereal. It's So yeah, again, it's very like individual. And do you even like eating fat? You know.
Yeah.
Sure. Comes to that, I suppose. But I think when we really look at the long-term data, there's never any really much significant difference in outcome when calories are matched. As long as you're getting like sufficient macronutrients to cover your health basis, which is most important. And fats have so many roles in health, most importantly for your clients' lipid health and hormonal function. I think you would definitely be shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, you haven't got much of a choice when you get in pre-contest. You're going to have to pull your fats, really.
Yeah, and that's the issue that I've always seen, Joe, is that if we're running low fat in the off season, then we're running low fat pre-contest. When on God's earth we're actually having a substantial amount of dietary fat. I think from an anecdotal point of view, I've always seen, as I've pushed up, especially from good sources like you're talking beef, whole eggs, potentially cheese, things like that. When I see these things pushed up, I always get feedback from clients that they're just generally feeling better, and maybe even like basic feedback post prep of sex drive returning and things like that tends to always be influenced by even a very acute time period of running higher fat. So we can tell the secretion and the effects there are definitely clear. So running 50 grams, 45 grams of fat year round. I'm in agreement there. I don't think that it's a sensible plan. I think the only way you could maybe work around it is having training day fats low, and if you're having 2 rest days a week, making the caloric amount from fat significantly higher. That's the only way that I can.
Yeah, I'm fat in that way. Yeah, if you're doing a nutrient timing approach where you're pulling down calories or whatever on your off days and pulling down carbs. I know it's a Dr. Scott likes it. I've got a lot of clients doing the same thing. Yeah. Got a lot of clients not doing that as well and eating the same thing every day. But yeah, it's a good way to kind of bump up your fats and then just target your carbohydrates around your peri-workout training window if your calories are relatively lower. But again, if you're on a high calorie intake, forget doing that because you're going to be stuffing your face on training days and then be starving on rest days.
Sure. So, one final question that I had for you on nutrition is intra-workout shakes. How highly do you rate intra-workout shakes? What does a general intra-workout shake layout for you and your clients sort of look like in terms of, obviously amounts differ greatly, but in terms of ingredients that are in the intra-workout shake, what does that tend to look like? Do you hear me, Joe?
So I've got you back now. Sorry, you just finished talking on my screen. There must be a lag. Am I back now? Have you got me? Yes, yeah, I got you. So intra-workout shakes, I am definitely a fan. I'm definitely a fan. It's multifaceted. I was talking to Lyle about this the other day, and he actually worked out under extreme resistance training protocols how much carbohydrate would be required to maintain full glycogen storage, essentially. As there's an old study that Dr. Stevenson shared where it shows that glucose glycogen, intramuscular glycogen, is actually depleted from the very first set of your session. Wow. Interestingly, although the effects may be minor, they do add up over time. Again, if you're somebody that's trying to win. But anyway, for every hour of resistance training, you're looking at about 30 grams of carbs to maintain top performance. So I'll keep my clients on around that number as they're dieting down. But again, this is another chance they have to eat. If you've got a high carb intake or a high protein intake, you can use some like hydrolyzed whey isolate or just whey isolate, easily digesting whey, and high molecular weight carbohydrates and with like a high osmolality, like highly brown cyclic dextrin or a carbolin. So not to draw blood away from any skeletal muscle tissue when you're training. It's a chance to eat. I essentially just see it as another eating window for people that have high caloric intakes. If not, then just enough to sustain performance. I like essential amino acids to keep amino pools topped off, especially for people using insulin, as insulin does have various synergies with it. Needs to pull from amino pools essentially to increase muscle protein synthesis. And if you're breaking that down during training, then we need to ameliorate that effect. And then I like just throwing things in with the intra-workout shake that could probably be taken at other times of the day. Ergogenics like creatine monohydrate, it's pretty much every client uses, and everyone should probably use creatine. You probably get about 5 grams of creatine with just over a kilo of beef per day. If you're not eating that, then supplement with it. Throw that in. We know that it's got a greater uptake with carbohydrates, so again, a good time to take it. Yeah. You can throw in glutamine there if you have any GI distress. I like a couple of grams of glycine for the sympathetic nervous system regulation. Taurine, 3 grams maybe if you suffer with back pumps, if you're a particularly fluid holding individual, or again, taurine has some PNS stimulation activity, which is good. What else do I use in my intra? Electrolytes. sodium, potassium, a gram of each. Brilliant. You know, it's easy. Strom actually do a intra-workout carb powder called Carbamax. It's the only one I've seen that has equal amounts of sodium and potassium in, and it's made of carbolin. So I'm a big fan of that. I think that works really well. Citrulline malate is a good ergogenic as well. Up to 8 grams works nicely. But you don't have to overcomplicate it. You know, don't be paralyzed. You know, paralysis by analysis, trying to make these intra-workout shakes with loads of crazy shit in it. You know, just some essential aminos and some carbs, even dextrose if that's all you can afford. If you can digest it well, a little amount works nice.
Sure, absolutely. Like, yeah, perfect. I think that'll give people a good thought process regarding intra-workout shakes. I have been a huge fan for quite some time too, and I think that you'd agree that there's something you want to try and keep in for as long as possible in a diet phase, correct? If we were going
100%, yeah. I have all of my clients dieting to prep with their Intra, and I've never had to pull it personally. Down to that 30 gram mark. I mean, 30 grams of carbs, you're not going to have to, unless you're doing some kind of keto thing, which I'm not a fan of anyway, you're not going to have to pull them.
Yeah, perfect. So if we were to do just one more question on nutrition, if we were to do a pullback, are you a fan of an aggressive pullback in terms of nutrition? Do we want to get it done as efficiently as possible, like as really, really fast and short in terms of the diet itself, or does that, again, obviously it applies to the individual themselves and where they're at, but are you more a fan of aggressive phases of dieting to break up and periodize an off-season?
Well, I'll talking off-season specifically, are you?
Yes, correct.
Right. So our base is really on the psychology of the client. If they just need to clean up a little bit, if we've been pushing, the faster the better, really, because the outcome's the same. We've got literature on that. You know, in unenhanced women, they don't even notice any skeletal muscle loss. In fact, post-diet, the appetite tends to be lower. The ghrelin response is lower in the people that lost the weight faster. Yeah, I shared that study on my page for anybody that wants to see it. It's on there somewhere, because it's pretty new. It just came out. I think I stole it from Lyle again. Yeah, but however, if the client has a history of bulimia or some kind of orthorexic behavior, binge purge cycles, simple things like that, they can't mentally handle harsh deficits, then I won't. But if they can, then great. You know, essentially I'll be going as fast as I can, because again, coming back to this goal setting, the goal is gaining muscle, and whilst we're in a deficit, unless we're using super physiological dosages of drugs, then we're not gaining any muscles. So I want to get them in and out as quick as possible. I want to get it done because I don't want to be there in the off season. We're wasting time essentially.
Yeah, sure, understood. So to discuss training in an off season phase, I think a lot of people get confused with volume quotas when they're setting up training for an off season phase. I think now what I'm seeing amongst most individuals is maybe paralysis by analysis again with volume. They're thinking, how can I be on the perfect amount of volume? Should I titrate my volume up? Should I titrate it down? Etc. etc. So how do you tend to sort of program volume for your clients over the course of an off-season phase? Are you looking to slowly work up to their maximum amount and then deloading, or you tend to have them hovering at an amount that they're able to progress on? How do you tend to set up volume in an off-season training protocol?
Yeah, this is certainly topic of the century in the fitness world. Volume. Should you train at some crazy high volume? Should you train with low volume, high intensity, as if there's some kind of mutually exclusive thing? I mean, if we were going to talk strictly optimal situations, then a client would probably be training at the highest volume, frequency, and intensity they can handle. But that doesn't translate into the real world. I mean, realistically, I'd probably err on the side of caution, see where they can progress. And as long as they're progressing, I don't want to touch anything. And typically if a client isn't progressing, I mean, because to me, the ultimate goal for an off season is to progressively overload, preferably via load. Although, of course, there are various ways to progress, whether it be better execution, reps, or sets, which I'm not a fan of. I'm really not somebody. I really personally don't like the periodization schemes of adding sets every week and stuff, and training with 3 reps in reserve on week 1 of it. Because I mean, to me, again, what gets measured gets managed, and to me, you can measure no intensity, you can measure nothing, or you can measure 100% effort, and in between is just your best guess.
Yeah.
So I like clients pretty much just training their working sets to the point that they fail on the concentric, they'll log it, and then we're aiming to progress load from there with that same number of reps and execution. Deloads, I don't like pre-programming either. It's based on biofeedback. And again, I'll usually do something like just ameliorate I could augment the volume. Something simple like, okay, we're still going to hit PBs on your top sets this week, but you're not going to do any back off sets, right? Something simple like that. Still enjoy training because everyone likes training hard, really. If you don't, then there's something wrong here, surely. And maybe they'll just train 50% volume that week. And then if they start progressing, then I might just hold them there. And we'll just do top sets for a little bit. And then maybe I'll put their volume up to 75% 2 weeks later. And we'll see where they're going from there. It's more of like an auto-regulation scheme for most of my clients on constant feedback rather than, right, at week 8 you're going to do this. Because I don't know how anything like that can be pre-programmed. Like human physiology is so acute because it's not. You know, you might just get a shit night's sleep one night and then you can't go in and do your 5 sets to 2 reps in reserve. So, you know, you see what you can do on the day. Yeah. And if you can progressively overload. And if you have a series of not being able to increase load, then there's probably something wrong that needs addressing. And it's usually too much volume. So, I mean, if I'm looking at the data, personally, I don't think people likely need to do more than 10 sets per body part per week. You could maybe push that up for weaker body parts or increase the frequency or something if you like. But if you're training hard and you're progressing with that number, to me, that's more than enough.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's refreshing to hear. I think a lot of people do get, like I said, worried and stressed about doing the amount of volume that's maybe said on a specific study or literature or what's posted online or what someone else is doing. Someone else doing much higher volume than them, someone else titrating their volume over time. So yeah, I think that's refreshing to hear that you're somewhat very, very much on the right path with regards to doing what the client needs to progress, which is ultimately what we're looking for in an off-season phase is progression. So as long as that's coming, then that's fantastic. I think we could, like you said, add sets until the cows come home, but if they're still lifting the same load on the bar over time, like we're really forcing true adaptation there. I'm not too sure whether we're maxing out that capacity or not. We're just adding endless sets, and the value of those sets continues to drop off as you add more and more.
Yeah, I feel like you're at junk volume at that point. And there's also an adherence thing as well. Like, in my experience, not many people like training with super high volume.
I agree, yeah.
But people love getting stronger. Like, it's cool to lift more weight. Like, especially women. Like, they love getting stronger.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, do 2 more sets this week. It's like, that is boring. Training to like 4 reps in reserve is boring. Yeah. So you're not going to ultimately adhere to it.
I think from what I've seen as well, just to comment on it a little bit, I think I've seen people that train super high volume. The only people that manage to do that and enjoy it are people that do not log their training. So they go in and they just annihilate a body part and they just go until they can't go. But looking at a training protocol and having 5 sets, 6 sets of one exercise or something, and then logging that repeatedly and trying to progress it, that is going to send you into some sort of psychopath, I think. Like, that's just going to be horrendous. I look at some of my sessions and think that's a lot of work, and there's not many exercises that are above 2 sets, and that seems like a lot to do because to psychologically lock into that is hard.
And as I've got like bigger and as I've got stronger, my capacity for work has dropped.
Yeah.
Which will happen. I mean, back when I started training and when I was like 17 and I weighed 120 pounds, I could train with a lot more volume. I mean, I'm 250 pounds now at the same height. So, you know, the amount of weight that I can lift is very different, you know, because I used to be able to only press the bar, you know, and today I did 150 for 9, which was a PB. You know, how much of that can you do? I can't do 6 sets of that. You know, for chest today, I did 4 sets and I was wrecked.
Yeah, that's low. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'll do that again later in the week, and you know, I'm toast,
Yep.
but I'm at peak strength as well. And I'll find out with clients as well as time goes on, we have to reduce the frequency and reduce their volume.
Yeah, sure. And you'd rather, obviously from a psychological perspective, you'd rather, as you progress as a trainee, train with the same level of intensity, but train with less work than train with a higher RIR and do more work.
Yes, yeah, yes. Because based on pure anecdote here, I mean, I used to train at Temple. I've trained with Dorian, and all the guys with the best look trained with intensity. And I mean, we're starting to see a little bit, like I shared a piece yesterday where the low volume, high intensity group outperformed the high volume, low intensity group. And it was a really well controlled study. They were all trained individuals. They continued to train in the same manner, and it was via ultrasound. And there was a wide variety. The control was excellent. Some of the best that I've seen in a research paper. And the lower volume group all got stronger, and they had bigger markers in the arms and the trunk, I think, but their legs were the same, the leg hard. But I feel like legs likely need more volume than the upper body in my experience anyway. And I feel like that's probably a proprioceptive thing for most people. Most people can't really execute legs very well.
Yeah.
I'm personally kind of the opposite. I've always had big legs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've seen some of your squats, man. They're strong.
All it seems to be growing is my ass, Joe. Like I don't
That's
think my quads
what you need, though, man. That's all you need. Trust me. I need more ham, but and everyone need more ham. But yeah, I've got a huge ass as well. I mean, I can't squat anymore. I tore my quad not too long ago, and yeah, it's done in my squats. Here we are talking about how good high intensity training is, and tore my quad. But based on anecdote and some recent research, I will say that there is a threshold of intensity. Where it is, I don't know. You know, it might be 1 rep in reserve, it might be 2, but why don't we just be safe and just go there? Because 1, it's fun, 2, it's mentally challenging and carries outside of the gym environment. Because when you do those things, you look back, you're like, oh, I can't believe I did that. You know, everything else seems so easy in life, you know, which is so fun. And, you know, you can measure it. What gets measured gets managed. I'm going to keep saying that. So if you're hitting an RP 10 or whatever term you want to give, if you're hitting concentric failure, you know that you've done X amount of work, and next week you can do X amount of work. If I say, it's like my wife, like she has no idea what intensity that she is training at. Like, she doesn't know how many reps, because she'll start hitting grinders and then she'll do 6 more. It's weird. But if I said train with 2 reps in reserve, she'd have stopped there, you know, because some people really don't know where their like intensity and strength is going to leave them, and that's the case, to just train it till you can't do anymore, you know.
Yeah, I agree, and this is why I get, like, again, another sort of thing that I've been absolutely avid on recently, or well, in the past year really, with coaching, is seeing people's training. It's just something that I didn't capitalize on enough at the start, and I wish I did, because half the reason why people weren't growing as effectively as I thought, or even holding on to muscle and retaining muscle in a diet, was they simply cannot train to the level that I want them to. Even if they're executing well, they can't train to the level of intensity that I deem as required for the task. So yeah, that's a very true point. One final topic that I wanted to cover actually on that point is a lot of people go into an off season with the goal of improving a weak body part. So, in terms of breaking down how to improve a weak body part, what would be how you basically baseline level what you do initially to work on that weak body part, and then how you move forwards with that in terms of programming, exercise selection, etc.
Yeah, good question actually, because over the years this has kind of changed for me. When I think about it, I think when I first started coaching when I was younger, my first kind of response would be to just throw more volume or frequency at it. But the first thing I'm kind of doing now with clients that have weak body parts is I want to know why it's a weak body part. So I'll look at their footage and look at their execution of the movement. And actually, more often than not, they're just not getting a good level of proprioception, activation, and execution, or even intensity like we're talking about in that muscle.
Yeah.
So it's a case of breaking down the loading patterns, how to effectively load the muscle for its full range. And then I often don't have to change anything, to be honest, because it's usually a weak muscle for a reason. You know, muscles grow. It's like people say, oh, I can't grow my calves. Like, you can grow your calves just like you can grow your biceps. Like, yeah, you might have some high insertions, whatever. You might have a high inserted tricep or a bicep. Same thing. You need to just increase the load. You need to progressively overload via, you know, whether it be a tensile overload or volume overload, like we were talking about, although it's not my first choice. It obviously works. It's usually a case of just training it properly. If not, then I would be looking at, like you said, exercise selection. What exercise are you using? Are they favorable for hypertrophy? Do they have good loading patterns, or are they just targeting one specific part of the range? Like biceps, for example, where people only do barbell curls and dumbbell curls. Yeah, I mean the mid range, you're exhausting. Great. If that's all you do, you're never getting a bicep truly short, and you're never getting a bicep truly long. And I think you need to really load the full range. So maybe in that example, I'd have a client do like a high preacher curl to get it really short, and then maybe like an incline cable curl away from the cable stage to get it long, and then learn to do that properly, increase load over time, and it's going to grow, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that a lot of people head towards, again, like we talked about previously, volume. They fail to get the baseline level of execution correct before they head into just adding sets upon sets. You know, like I think quite a common one that I see is females heading into their off season with not enough glute tissue, so they just add more glute work, more kickbacks, more abductors, etc., and without really fully appreciating how much a compound lift with great execution and targeted range of the glutes can provide, you know. And once they nail that, you see, you know, the tissue just fly on. So yeah, I think that's perfect. So yeah, Joe, awesome. That's pretty much all I really wanted to cover in terms of a brief synopsis on the off season itself. And I thank you very much for your time. I'm hoping that some people have definitely, I know definitely people have taken something from this, mate. And like I said to anyone listening, definitely listen to Joe's and Austin's podcast. It's obviously, again, they do talk a lot about assisted topics, but I know that there's a lot of my following that have considered that route, and you must listen to that podcast amongst others in terms of deciding your point of view on that subject moving forwards, because you have to be educated, and Joe and Austin are very much educated on those topics. So before you do go down that route, educate yourself with people like Joe and Austin, and you'll be in a much better environment to make the full use of it. So yeah, thanks very much for your time, mate. I'll leave you to your evening, and yeah, any questions for either Joe or myself, just leave them in the comments box. Cheers, guys.